Today's video is going to continue on our properties of special quadrilaterals, and the video is going to be a little bit different today. I'm going to talk about the first page with you, do a couple problems with you guys, and then have you come in with the rest of the notes filled out and questions to be asked. Okay? So here is a nice little diagram for us about the quadrilateral family tree. Okay. And this very top one is a quadrilateral. And remember that a quadrilateral has four sides. So our very first box is a quadrilateral. Okay. Then over to the left, we have a trapezoid. And then remember that we have a special type of trapezoid that goes right underneath it, and that's an isosceles trapezoid. And that's where you have the legs congruent. Okay. Then we have, in the middle, we have a kite, because remember that a kite is not a parallelogram. And then on the right, we have a parallelogram. And remember that we have 5 characteristics of a parallelogram: opposite sides parallel, opposite sides congruent, opposite angles congruent, consecutive angles supplementary, and diagonals bisect each other. Then a parallelogram continues on. A parallelogram branches out into a rectangle, and a rectangle is one that's unique because all angles are right angles. And then we also have a rhombus. Now notice that a rhombus can be both a parallelogram and a kite. Okay. And then finally, we have a square. Okay. So you're going to be asked a series of questions of like which properties apply to which parallelogram, or excuse me, which quadrilateral, and then these always, sometimes, never questions. So if you notice on the right side, we have this chart that says sometimes and then all. So if I pick a square, then a square can also be a rectangle, a parallelogram, a quadrilateral. A square can also be a rhombus, which can be a kite, which is a quadrilateral. So going up, it's always true. Just like an isosceles trapezoid is always a trapezoid, which is always a quadrilateral. A kite is always a quadrilateral. A rectangle is always a parallelogram, always a quadrilateral. So going up is always true. Going down is sometimes true. So a quadrilateral sometimes will be a parallelogram. Think about why the answer would be sometimes, because it also could be a kite, it also could be a trapezoid, it also could be none of those. Okay? Another example. A parallelogram is sometimes a rectangle. It's not always a rectangle, because in order for it to be a rectangle, all angles need to be right angles. So if you have a parallelogram that's not all angles right angles, then it can't be a rectangle. But a rectangle is always a parallelogram. Okay? So going down is sometimes, going up is always. And then here's another little visual to help you remember it. So quadrilaterals encompass everything, right? That's why it's at the top of our family tree. Then we have trapezoids, and then inside isosceles trapezoid. So going into the bubbles is sometimes, going out is always. So a quadrilateral is sometimes a trapezoid is sometimes an isosceles trapezoid. But if I started an isosceles trapezoid, it's always a trapezoid, it's always a quadrilateral. Okay, same thing over here. So a parallelogram is sometimes a rectangle, or sometimes a rhombi, or sometimes a kite. But if I start with the square, then it's always a rectangle, always a parallelogram, always a quadrilateral. Previous page. Remember that going from the direction from down to up is always true. So a square. Okay, so first and foremost, it's going to be important to fill out this information, okay? And I'm going to have you guys fill this chart in on your own, and then that way then tomorrow, whenever we go over this, we can see if we agree or not, okay? Just to do an example with you guys, let's talk about diagonals of a trapezoid are congruent. So if you think about the characteristics of diagonals being congruent, which is this category right here, okay? Diagonals are only congruent for an isosceles trapezoid, a rectangle, and a square. Okay, so diagonals of a trapezoid are congruent. Well, the answer to that would be sometimes, because it has to be an isosceles trapezoid in order for the diagonals to be congruent. Okay, if it's a regular trapezoid, the diagonals are not congruent. So that's why it is sometimes. Okay, let's take a look at number 3. So a square is a rectangle. If you go back to your chart, always a rectangle. So a square is always a rectangle. Okay. Let's do one more with the chart, and then, like I said, I'm going to have you guys fill in the rest of this information on your own. So let's take a look at number 8. It says the diagonals of a parallelogram are perpendicular. So let's go ahead and find that one, which is right here. So diagonals are perpendicular. That happens in a rhombus, a square, and a kite. Okay, so for number 8, the diagonals of a parallelogram are perpendicular. Well, that would sometimes be true because a rhombus and a square are both parallelograms, but a rectangle is also parallelogram, so it doesn't have to be perpendicular. Okay, so like I said, you guys need to fill out this chart. And how do you fill out this chart? You need to use your notes, okay, from yesterday or from the previous video, and then answer the following questions. One I will help you with is the diagonals form 2 pairs of congruent triangles, because we didn't really talk about that one too much in our notes. So I'll help you guys fill that one in. This happens basically for parallelograms. So parallelogram, a rhombus, a square, and a rectangle. Okay? All right, so fill out the rest of this chart using your notes, and then fill out the rest of the questions, and we will go over this tomorrow or the next day. Thank you so much.